Okay, so what we provided on, I think it was early Saturday morning, is a counter proposal to the last proposal y'all provided to us. And I don't recall, Sean, I think that early language on page 5 is, I don't think you were objecting to that coming out. I think you just didn't deal with it, so I actually ended up just removing it. But I mean, if there's some issue with that, let me know. It looks like cleanup to me, but I don't know if there's some concern that you have about it. And then under the definitions, I think, we'll talk about actively at work in just a second, but under the definition of police officer, I felt like D and E are actually just, unnecessary to the definition. The definition itself, I think, is comprised with A, B, C, and F. It's clear that as far as the city's concerned, these individuals are not employed as an officer of the San Antonio Police Department. And regarding whether there's coverage under Chapter 143, I think that may be an open question, actually. But I don't think that's something that's necessary to be comprised or part of the definition of police officer. Under 1.2, we reinserted the actively at work definition, and I think I really need the city to think about this a little bit. There's at least one case that I looked at recently that I'll be happy to send you. It's an airport police case. I think it's from 2010. You may be familiar with it already, but it had to do with compensation, overtime compensation, and it was basically during a break period. I think it was a 30-minute break or something like that. And the issue in that case was whether or not the airport police should be entitled to compensation. And my understanding of the case is that the court held that there was an entitlement to compensation, even though that was considered break time, because the officers were on call during that period of time. And so just, my concern is these guys are in uniform, they're carrying a weapon. And to some degree, these days, unfortunately, that's a sufficient reason for individuals to go out and attack people like that, so to shoot them. We've had terrible things, even in the city of San Antonio. A police officer sitting in his car is shot. I'm not sure that under those circumstances, that officer, if he was under this law enforcement function definition, would actually qualify. It talks about patrolling, but I'm not sure exactly where that definition would fall. So I do think there needs to be better protection for these police officers. I do think the fact that they are in uniform and carrying weapons does distinguish them from other civilians, and I think that's something that the city really needs to look at. So that's the reason. We didn't just slip it back in. I do feel like based on the additional work that we've done, it's an important issue that the city needs to address.
So just to be clear, I think you made 2 points there. One is that, even when they're not doing quote law enforcement thing, when they're not making an arrest or patrolling and things like that, that they're still being compensated.
That's right.
They're still being paid.
Yeah.
And then the second point was there could be things that could happen that happen because you're law enforcement officers.
Just because they're identifiable.
Right. That might not be covered here.
Right.
I think that we can certainly consider the latter of those.
Okay. Yeah. All right, that's fine. I think, the term, again, we do feel like there should be a period of time involved past the term that we've set up. I know y'all have a 4-year provision in your contract. We really wanted this to try to coincide with the police contract, but that's something we can continue to talk about. Under discretion. Under discretionary powers, Article 3, My understanding, and Henry can address this in more detail, but my understanding of that is there, at this point in time, there are a number of individuals that have some level of authority, and to some degree, the command structure is just problematic, because a number of those individuals really don't have a lot of knowledge of the park police, and yet they're in a position of control or command. And so the idea here is really to try to streamline the chain of command, and hopefully that would make things run more smoothly. Do you want to address anything with regard to that?
The overall problem we run into is, once again, you made the statement, I'm not a division of SAPD, I'm independent. The problem is, with the chain of command as it is, it's set up as a division of SAPD. The chief either doesn't have the time or the resources to devote to being the daily operations manager, so he puts that to an AC. The AC does not take every phone call from the captain, so he puts it to a DC. The DC puts it to our captain in park police, but at airport, he then puts it to,
An SAPD captain?
which I don't know his name, but I'll just.
Paul Biagioli.
There you go.
Which then again goes to
Then
lieutenant.
goes to an SAPD lieutenant, who's also, so you've set up an SAPD structure with all of these SAPD people, and without any offense, he doesn't know that I wear the same model uniforms. I would almost be willing to guarantee that the majority of those people don't know how our disciplinary structure is set up, that they'd have to go back and reference all of it, or what our SOPs are, what our standard patrol procedures are. I understand they know a lot of them, because a lot of them are all but copied from the SAPD general manual. But the deviations are where the differences are. And for them to be put in a position that he didn't choose to be in, and then told.
Are you referring to me?
Well, not just you, but I mean the entire chain of command. I doubt the majority of SAPD's chain of command has read my general manual front to back, or airport's general manual front to back, and then committed all of the SOPs for both agencies, along with the agencies and information they already have to consume. And then have to switch back and forth depending on who they happen to be talking to that day. I recognize that that has to be difficult. And it's a lot to ask of anyone, and to this point, there are many instances where, well, no sir, that's not the way we do things because our manual actually says this. And then it's kind of awkward to tell your boss that, well, yeah, that's the way y'all do it, but that's not actually the way we do it, because we have a different book. So this just narrows down to a singular point so that one person can be in charge and have the responsibility of having that knowledge. Now, who the chief decides that is to the chief, you know. Just like the city manager chose the chief to be in charge, the chief can designate whoever he wishes to have this multi-phasic responsibility.
Okay, I think I understand, but just three questions, from me anyway. How is that different than having the one designated, for instance, at airport, you have the one designated captain over there? How is what you're proposing different than that?
Well, because that captain still doesn't respond to the chief.
Okay, so you're
That
saying,
captain responds to a deputy chief, who responds to an assistant chief, who responds to, you just keep leapfrogging with people.
okay,
I would make the argument that the airport and the park are run more as a section than a division. And the section's a smaller unit down from a division, because ultimately, like the parks report to the central, or the I guess the south deputy chief, and the airport reports to the north deputy chief of patrol. So, I mean, they're run as I know you use the word division, but it's not really a division where the division commander, being whoever's in charge of the park or airport, reports directly to either an assistant or the chief himself. There's still a chain of command.
The problem
Every
is-
section in SAPD basically works the same way. It's a captain up to a deputy chief, there's an assistant chief, and then the chief.
And that makes my point exactly, is according to the city, I'm not a section of SAPD, and therefore I shouldn't be run as a section of SAPD. Because I'm not. So you actually make the argument for me, which is, yes, we're run as a section of SAPD.
But you're asking to report directly, basically to report directly to the chief.
Yes, to be our own independent agencies is what the city has told me I am.
So, okay. Bob, the point that Chief Flavin made was not necessarily that you're being run as a section.
Well, no, that's actually the point. That's actually what the man said
Yeah.
verbatim.
Well, hold on.
I know it's not what you wanted to say. I mean, I get it.
Do
See,
you want to
that's-
remain civil about this? I'm going to make a point here. You had indicated that you thought that it was being run as a division with a shortened chain of command, and I think that what Chief Flavin was saying was that, no, in fact, if the analogy would be going through the various hierarchy in the chain of command, if you were going to stick with that analogy, because it would actually be a level of command below the divisional level.
Yeah, so, and let me just say, I think the point that we're trying to make is, while that may work under the SAPD scheme, it's more difficult for that to work under this scheme, because those individuals are all looking at one contract, one policy and procedure, and what we're talking about here is someone that has to actually work in both worlds, the way that it's currently structured. And so the ability to have someone that the chief designates that is actually committed to understanding both worlds and how they would interact, I think actually could be helpful to the city. So, I mean, I think that's where we're trying to come from.
No, I think I understand that aspect of it. My second question was how would how would putting it in writing, well, I guess just for purposes of
That's just
clarity and,
clarification.
yeah. And what about the consent component? What's that in there for? That was my third
The
question.
consent component
Yeah.
is just to make us part of the process.
So if the chief wanted to designate a different person than the one that had been previously designated, you guys have to, you get vetting authority?
I don't
That's what
think
I'm
it's,
asking.
yeah, I don't think it's a different person. I think if there were additional people. So if we're going back toward what the current structure is, it would be nice to be able to have some input on that, I think is the idea.
Got it.
Can I ask a question just from my own knowledge? Where would the chain of command stop? This one designated person, where would that stop between the chief and where? If that one person is designated, then what's the maximum rank you have at the airport or park?
That would be a discussion for the city to come up with. If they want to keep a captain as an operational director, the daily operations, such as Captain Wise at our facility, then so be it. It would have to change, and the lieutenant and captain that are currently assigned from SAPD to the airport would be reassigned wherever it is into SAPD that you decided, and those positions would have to be refilled with airport personnel.
Okay, that makes it a little more clear for me.
That would be
Yeah.
a continuity in the chain of command.
So you're talking about,
Captain,
so
and
one,
then-
I'm sorry, so one position basically, so you're saying replace the airport lieutenant captain with an airport
Lieutenant captain.
person, yeah. Then there would be one person between them and the chief, that's what you're,
If the chief so decided. I mean, the chief can obviously be chief if he wishes. The chief is always chief.
but if he wants to
If he
designate a
wants to
person,
say, I'd like Chief Flavin to be operationally in charge.
gotcha, I understand
Then
now.
when the captain has an issue, they call you directly.
Okay. Understood.
Okay, do you have any other questions about that? And then the 3.5, I think, isn't that y'all's language? I think we just incorporated y'all's language there. And then what we tried to do under wages and benefits.
Hold on.
Oh, yeah,
Let's hit that at the end.
the wages and benefits?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
If you don't mind.
No, I don't care.
Okay.
So just take out, okay, so we'll go to Article 5, 6, and I think 6 was y'all's language.
On D, 6.2D?
6.2.
Yeah, that's ours.
And then we did add under 6.4.
Through 6.9.
Yeah, and I think this is, again, just to try to put into the agreement what that particular process would be in terms of investigating complaints, and what steps should be taken. So, if y'all have any specific questions on that, but I mean, I think the response that we had received was that this is already covered in other, I guess,
General
the
manager.
And the
general
GMs.
manual.
Mhm.
We
Well,
can-
it was.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it would be good to have something that the officers are able to see that is part of the agreement, that actually spells out what the process is going to be, and that they can rely upon that during the, at least during the term of the agreement, whatever that term is. So that's the reason that we've incorporated that into that particular article. And then under Article 7, we did make some changes to language under B, under the duration provision. And basically, just what I'm trying to capture there is, I think there needs to be a process similar to what you would see for police and fire, where if there is an injury that is going to last longer than that year, there should be some discretionary process for both for the police chief and for the individual, if the police chief denies them that additional time. And so that's what I think we're trying to capture under B. There is, that last sentence is basically, the concern that I have there is, especially with police officers, some of these aggravations or exacerbations of injuries can take a long time to manifest. And so if we say that those are going to go back to the original injury, my concern is that that officer may already be out of time under whatever the duration provision is. I don't read, as it currently stands, I don't read the duration provision to actually extend that period of time or to start again. It actually would be part of that original year, and I think that could be problematic. So I'm just trying to create room for these individuals to have some sort of coverage if something, unfortunate like that was to occur. There's some cleanup again of police and peace officer that we tried to capture those. I'm not sure if we did all of them. And then we took out performing a law enforcement function under 7.3 and replaced it with actively at work.
7.1 too, also, right? Yeah, all right.
Sorry about that. Missed that one. Yeah. And then, under 7.5, talk about that one.
If we're using the terminology as actively at work instead of law enforcement function, then we went ahead and removed the review by the chief, because either you're at work or you're not at work, there's nothing really to review. So it becomes unnecessary. Just have to clean up that.
And I think, let me make sure. Okay, yeah. So that takes us over to the uniform clothing allowance. We did change our previous position. We're actually trying to get up to where the police are, but we do it more incrementally. We raised the amount from what it was under the current contract or current agreement from $320 to $445, and then eventually getting up to $560. But we did try to do that, on a more graduated pace than what we've done previously. And then I think 9.4, the idea there is that if individuals after those first 2 years have purchased their equipment or clothing, that should be something that they are entitled to. That's not something that would have to be turned in. They're actually purchasing it with money that they've received for that purpose under the agreement. Article 10, we do feel strongly there needs to be some recognition of the association, and some commitment by the city to provide for those association rights. And whether that is the time component, whether it is a facility component. I know we talked about bulletin boards already, and I think we actually incorporated the language in 10.4 that we had talked about regarding bulletin boards. But that's what that particular article is going toward. It's just something that is important to this association moving forward. And then Article 11, again, just setting out those management responsibilities, what the city is to provide and what the city is not going to engage in. So if there are any questions there.